I want to start this video right off by saying if you don't believe that Xiangling is very strong or broken, I want you to watch this next clip. As you guys saw, she dealt like 40k every single vaporize and destroyed Abyss 12 in one rotation. Now you might be thinking that Child was doing the most damage there or that she's dependent on him, but that's not at all the case. Child was just enabling her to vaporize every single hit of her Pyro NATO, making him a very good enabler for Xiangling, whereas she is the main carry. But there are also many comps like the one I have right now, which is a 4-star comp, that let Xiangling shine and be an insanely powerful Pyro carry. She is very strong and very flexible and can also be used obviously as like a burst support. You can fit her in many different team comps, but you can also make comps that let her shine, let her be this insane Pyro carry, which we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about her as a carry and as a like support, different team comps, artifacts, everything you need to know about her in this video. Before I get into it, I want you guys to know that I stream almost every night on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. And I want to give a special thanks and shout out to Zedef77, my math guy, who just does insane calcs on everything, a renowned theory crafter, who does God's work and calculated a lot of like MVs with different weapons for Xiangling, and a lot of the math surrounding her, so I do want to give credit where credit is due. And with that being said, let's get right into the video. The first thing we have to do is talk about Xiangling's talents and why she's so good. First up, we have Guoba, who's an adorable teddy bear that just does constant AoE pyro damage. Now, it's not that much damage, but it's an okay amount, and it also applies pyro to enemies, and there are a few talents and constellations that do buff him that we'll talk about in a bit. But Guoba's also pretty dumb. Sometimes he'll attack like the wrong enemy or will miss, and it's just really annoying. So he is kind of unreliable and not like the best ability. However, he has his uses and does generate particles, but definitely not why she's broken. The reason why Xiangling is so good is because of her Pyro NATO, which has insane scalings and just does a ton of damage every single time it swings, and it can constantly vaporize every single hit if you want it to, if you're running like Xingqiu or Child as your main DPS. So overall, Pyro NATO will just do a ton of damage and destroy everything. Now keep in mind, it does have a high energy cost, but since it does have a 20-second cooldown, 10 of which it's active, you can spend that time farming your particles for her by like spamming Bennett E, swapping to her and catching them, or doing whatever you need to get her energy back. Also, both of her passive talents basically just buff her Guoba. One of them gives her more range, and the other drops a chili pepper from Guoba, and you can pick it up to gain attack. So if you do see a chili pepper, definitely run into it and pick it up. But overall, Pyro NATO is just really strong, and you should definitely level Pyro NATO above everything. You can also level her normal attacks if you're running her as a main carry, because during your downtime, well, basically while your Pyro NATO is active, I guess, you are going to be doing some normal attacks with her, but you're also going to be spamming your E's on Bennett to get your Pyro NATO back. I would say the priority of talents is Pyro NATO, and then Guoba, and then normal attacks. Another thing regarding Pyro NATO is that it actually snapshots. If you don't know what that means, it basically means that your stats will be factored in when you use the burst for your whole burst. Basically, you want to use Bennett's burst before Xiangling's burst, because when you use your Xiangling burst inside of Bennett's burst, it'll buff it for the whole duration. So basically buff your Xiangling before you use her Pyro NATO, then when you use your Pyro NATO, it'll be as strong, like it'll be buffed for the whole duration. Regarding Xiangling's constellations, there's one that is extremely important. First of all, let me say that Xiangling C0 still has a ton of damage and is very strong. She just has a bit more downtime, because at Constellation 4, which is her best one and an insane constellation, her Pyro NATO gets 40% increased duration, so it just gives her more damage overall, right? Because her burst has a longer duration, which is very strong. Constellation 4 is definitely what you should try to get if you can, but she does have other good constellations. For example, her C3 is just nice because it increases the level of your Pyro NATO, so it's more damage. Her Constellation 1 reduces pyro resistances of enemies by Guoba when Guoba hits them, so it makes your Guoba kind of useful. Also, keep in mind, her Constellation 6 is pretty bad because it only buffs like your other party members' pyro damage bonus. It does buff your Xiangling, like if you Guoba after this is active, but it won't buff your burst. It won't buff your Pyro NATO because as we mentioned, it's snapshots, so the pyro damage bonus you gain after you use your burst won't buff the damage of your Pyro NATO, making it not a great constellation. Now I'm going to show you guys how to basically use Xiangling in a comp that revolves around her with like Xingqiu, Bennett and stuff. A really powerful team that basically does a ton of damage with her vaporized Pyro NATO, and how to maximize her energy generation so that you don't need to stack too much ER. I'm showing you an example with very low ER, 155, so I'm only running substats, no main stat sands, and no energy recharge weapon, just to show you guys how I manage low ER. Now keep in mind, you can and probably should have more ER. I'm not telling you to not build any. I'm just showing you how to manage the particle gain with this comp so that you can stack as much crit, elemental mastery, and all that stuff. So this is one of Xiangling's best teams. It's a really strong 4-star comp with Xiangling, Bennett, Xingqiu, Sucrose, and every character here plays an important role, which I'll cover in the team comp section. So the way this comp works is basically you want to swirl the enemies with Sucrose to reduce their resistances and give elemental mastery to your team. Then just use all your bursts in conjunction. Make sure you snapshot Xiangling's burst, and then in the downtime, as you guys can see, what you're gonna be doing to ensure that you're doing maximum amounts of damage is basically do auto attacks to apply the hydro from the rain swords while your Pyro Nado vaporizes everything, and you're going to be spamming Bennett E in between the autos and then swapping to Xiangling so that she can catch the particles. So as you can see, I press E on Bennett, swap to Xiangling to catch them, and then auto attack in between for maximum particle jet. Now as you can see here, with only I think 150 ER, my burst is already back up, and I think it was only like 1 or 2 seconds after the cooldown was up. As you can see here, it was on 2 seconds right there when I swapped to Xingqiu, and then after I catch these particles, my burst is already back, and like some of the rotations I did weren't optimal. I didn't do as much damage as I could have, but this just goes to show you that even with low ER, you can manage basically as long as you're managing your particles efficiently. Your Bennett E, swap to Xiangling to catch them, and focus on dealing a bunch of damage. Now let's start by talking about Xiangling's artifact sets. So I want to split this in 2 sections. First of all, I want to talk about Xiangling as a Pyro carry, as a Vaporize carry, a main DPS who's going to be constantly proccing Vaporize and dealing a ton of damage. And then we're going to talk about Xiangling as just a regular burst support that you can plug in like any comp when she's not going to be the one proccing reactions, when she's just there to do Pyro damage with her Pyro Nado. And an example of this would be like in a Xiao team, a Ganyu team, or something like that. So first of all, if Xiangling is your Vaporize carry, like you saw in the intro clip with Child, she's going to be doing a ton of damage constantly proccing Vaporize. Because of that, you want to maximize your damage on her in the artifact sets, so the best one would be the 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames if you can get it. What this does is, first of all, the 2-piece is very nice, 15% pyro damage bonus, and then the 4-piece gives you another 15% damage when you vaporize, which you're always going to be doing, and another 7.5 with the second part, which gives you 50% of the first 2-piece, so that's 7.5% damage for every stack, and even though you're only going to get 1 stack, it's still 7.5%, so it's just good. Now, keep in mind, 2 Noblesse with 2 Witch, even if you're vaporizing, can be very similar DPS, because this gives you 20% damage, whereas the 4-piece of Witch gives you 22.5, since you're only stacking it once. So it's similar, and while Crimson Witch is better, I would say it depends heavily on the substats. So if you don't have a good 4-piece Witch, you could run 2 Witch with 2 Noblesse, and it is similar damage. It's very good. Another viable set I want to mention, especially in the early game when you don't have a lot of elemental mastery, is the 2-piece Wanderers. 2-piece Wanderers gives you 80 EM, which is pretty good, and you can pair this with another 2-piece, like 2-piece Noblesse, or 2-piece Witch, and you can use this like before you get a good 4-piece Witch. It can just be a viable option. Now, if you're just running Xiangling as a support in like, let's say a Xiao comp or a Ganyu comp where Ganyu is going to be the one melting, so Xiangling isn't proccing reactions, she's just kind of there. What you would want is ideally 2-piece Noblesse with 2-piece Witch is usually the best because you get 15% pyro damage bonus and 20% elemental burst damage bonus, so it's just a lot of damage that you gain, and it's really nice overall. Something else you can run is a 4-piece Lava Walker if your enemies are always Pyro afflicted, so like a Mono Pyro comp, or even like a Xiao team where Xiao's going to be swirling, but he's not really going to be removing the Pyro element that much, so you're going to be able to benefit from Lava Walker. So this set can be viable as well in certain situations, but I personally have never used it. So TLDR, if you're vaporizing, 4 Witch is the best, but 2 Witch with 2 Noblesse or even 2 Witch with 2 Wanderers can work. And I'd say it heavily depends on the substats, especially between Witch and Noblesse. If you're running Xiangling as just a support who isn't vaporizing, I would run 2-piece Noblesse Oblige and 2-piece Crimson Witch of Flames. Now we're going to talk about specific artifact stats that you're looking for Xiangling. Keep in mind, this is also going to be split into 2 parts, running a comp where Xiangling is going to be vaporizing, where she's the carry, and when Xiangling is just a burst support on your team. So we're going to start with the former. When Xiangling is your basically vaporize carry, when you run her in a team with like Xingqiu, who's going to be letting you constantly vaporize on Xiangling, what you're going to want to prioritize is basically Xiangling's damage. So crit is really important, and you're still going to need stuff like energy recharge, but you're going to try to maximize your DPS as much as you can. What this means is you're going to definitely want a pyro damage goblet and a crit circlet, either crit rate or damage, trying to maintain a 1-to-2 ratio. And then your sands is kind of where things get complicated. For sands, there are many good options, and this is what really depends and what changes. No matter how you run Xiangling, as a carry or as a just off-field support, you're still going to run the pyro goblet and the crit circlet. The only thing that changes is basically your sands and some substats. What I mean by that is if Xiangling is going to be your main carry, the one doing all the damage, you want to try to maximize that damage and give her just as much energy recharge as she needs without going overboard. Regarding energy recharge sands, in a comp where Xiangling is an off-field support like a Xiao team, where you use Pyro Nado on Xiangling, swap to Xiao, and don't really think about your Xiangling anymore, you're going to want a ton of energy recharge, so an energy recharge sands can be ideal and optimal in that comp. But for main DPS Xiangling, I would split it into how you play her. Like if you're just casually using Xiangling main DPS, not thinking too much about it, maybe in a child comp, you might want to run energy recharge sands to make sure you get it all the time. So see what works for you. However, if you're playing her optimally in a comp where you're feeding her particles with Bennett like I showed previously, you can get away without the ER sands. You can get away with an attack percent sands, which will give you just a lot more damage because obviously attack percent gives you much more damage than energy recharge, and you can look for ER on the substats just as much as you need. But I know a lot of people like having a ton of energy recharge for like comfy gameplay or casual gameplay when you're not just spamming Bennett's E and swapping to Xiangling, so it really depends on your playstyle. I tend to give optimal builds, which is why I use attack percent, but energy recharge, depending on your playstyle, can be what you want, so I can't just give a definitive answer for everyone. It really depends. Also worth mentioning that Elemental Mastery Sands can be viable, it can be a good option, especially depending on substats, but attack percent is generally what you would want to go if you're not running like energy recharge. With that out of the way though, for substats you would normally want crit, EM, attack percent, and energy recharge are all very good, and it depends on what you need. Obviously crit is just always good, but you'll probably also need energy recharge on your substats depending on how much ER you already have. Now we have to talk about Xiangling's weapons. First of all, I want to say she's extremely versatile and has a lot of good options. Like seriously, a lot of weapons are very strong on her. First of all, I want to make it clear that every single 5-star is really strong on her. Jade Spear gives you a ton of damage, especially if you keep her on field. And if she's like your main DPS, Jade Spear will give you a ton of damage in a Pyro build because you get crit rate, high base attack, and the effect will stack up. Staff of Homa is also insane, 66% crit damage, and a good effect is nothing to scoff at. And the 2 other 5-stars can be good too. Vortex Vanquisher is just a stat stick, and Skyward Spine can be especially useful if you need the energy recharge, because it has a high base attack and a pretty good effect, and then on top of that, it gives you energy recharge, which you usually need. So overall, I would say if you have a 5-star, use it. I personally use Deathmatch on my Xiangling because my 5-stars are on other units. And this is actually the next weapon I want to talk about. The Battle Pass option, the Deathmatch, which is really strong. It has a low base attack, but it gives you an insanely high crit rate substat with a pretty good effect. So overall, the Deathmatch on just about any polearm user is very good, and Xiangling is no exception. While the base attack is pretty low, you're usually going to be using Xiangling in Bennett's ult, who will have like a 4-piece noblesse, so you'll get a lot of attack given to you. And so like the crit rate and the effect kind of make up for the low base attack and just make it a very strong option for damage. Now there are other good options. Lithic Spear can be good, Dragon's Bane can be very strong as well, because it increases damage against Hydro or Pyro afflicted opponents, and this can be especially strong when your Xiangling is vaporizing, because the enemies are always going to be Hydro, and it gives you Elemental Mastery, which is good for Vaporize. So in a carry Xiangling build, I really like Dragon's Bane as well, and think that you can't really go wrong with any of these options. The energy recharge spears are good and what I used as a pure support Xiangling. As a carry, as I said in my artifact section, energy recharge is still good, but you want to try to maximize her damage over the energy recharge. You want to go with like the minimum amount of energy recharge you need to still like to give her max DPS kind of thing. And in that case, an energy recharge weapon would usually not be ideal. Something like crit would be better. But if you're running her as a pure support, right, in a Xiao comp, in a Ganyu comp, in a just any DPS where you fit Xiangling in, where she's not being like fed particles, energy recharge weapons like Favonius Lance can be very, very good. Also, another good option I want to mention is Blackcliff Pole if you can get it, because it gives you crit damage. For the free-to-play options, there's Crescent Pike and the other one that recently changed its name, I believe, to Prototype Star Glitter, which gives you energy recharge. And so it's pretty straightforward which one you'd want. For DPS, main like on-field Xiangling, doing normal attacks, all that, Crescent Pike is the best, obviously, because it'll just make you deal more damage with this high base attack and good effect. And the physical damage helps you out while your Pyro Nado is spinning, like you're going to be doing some auto attacks, so it's just more damage. The Prototype Star Glitter gives you energy recharge, however, so it's what I would recommend if you have ER problems, and especially if you're running her as a support. Especially in like a child comp where you're off field most of the time. And Xiangling's lucky in that both free-to-play options, the Pike and the Star Glitter, are pretty good on her. Now we have to talk about Xiangling's party setups, her teams, and this is probably the most important part of the video. So I want to explain why Xiangling is so good and what comps work really well with her, and some tips regarding each comp. So first of all, I've said it like 8 times in the video, there's 2 main ways to play her, but in a comp that you're building around Xiangling, when you're making her like the main carry, she'll do so much damage and all your support characters play a vital role, so having a good team comp is essential. First of all, I'd say Bennett is like a must with her. It's really hard to replace Bennett with Xiangling because he feeds her Pyro particles very fast with his short cooldown E ability, elemental skill, especially when it's used in his burst. And on top of that, he gives a lot of damage to Xiangling's Pyronado because it does snapshot, as we mentioned earlier. So overall, Xiangling Bennett is pretty much a must. Like, I'm never not using Bennett with my Xiangling, always pair them together because he is just overall like the best healer, right? But on top of that, he's just really strong with Xiangling. Now, in order to make her a top tier carry, however, you want to be vaporizing all the time. So when you are running a comp focused around Xiangling, Xingqiu is a great option. Now, we're going to talk about Xingqiu comps and Tartaglia comps, but with Child and Xingqiu, what you can do is basically proc every burst at the same time, Xingqiu ult, Bennett ult, Xiangling ult, and you'll just be vaporizing everything. You spam your auto attacks, spam Bennett E's, constantly vaporize. And if I'm good at editing, there should be background footage right now. You'll see Xiangling and Xingqiu together are just constantly vaporizing and doing a ton of damage. Now, the last character in this team comp is Sucrose, and this can be replaced, right? If you have a C6 Diona, she can be a shielder with Elemental Mastery. Xiangling can reduce enemy resistances, so there are some good options in your 4th slot. I'd say this is the most flexible one, but I would still argue that Sucrose is the best overall for a few reasons. First of all, Viridescent Venerer is broken. You can swirl Pyro, reduce enemy resistances by 40%, and you'll just do a ton of damage, a lot more damage with your Pyronado. On top of that, she gives Elemental Mastery to your team with her talents. So this is just really good because you're vaporizing, right? And then lastly, if you run her on a Thrilling Tales, if you run her on a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, this is a 48% attack increase to your Xiangling's burst, which does snapshot once again. So Thrilling Tales can be nice, a nice bonus. But even if you're running like Sac Frags or something, she still gives you Viridescent Venerer and the Elemental Mastery. Now, in a Child comp, Tartaglia comp, this is actually what I use the most. What you're going to be running is Child, Xiangling, Bennett. These are the core 3 characters. Child as your sort of main DPS, but he's mainly an enabler for Xiangling. So when you look at this comp, you think Child is like the carry, right? But in reality, while Child does a lot of damage, because, you know, he's still a strong character, Xiangling's going to be the one vaporizing all the time, because Child applies Hydro so fast that he's not going to be vaporizing. It's going to be basically enabling Xiangling to constantly vaporize, and she's going to be doing the most damage in the team, much more than your Child, who's going to be on field most of the time. You also need a Bennett in this comp for the same reasons as the last one, but especially because during Child's E's downtime, right, as you guys know, if you have Tartaglia, his E has a very, very long cooldown. And so because of that, in the downtime of Child's E, you can either run another DPS if you want to in like the 4th slot, or what you can do is actually what I do and what I recommend. You can spend that time farming particles on Bennett. So during the downtime of Child's E, especially if you're not in it the whole time, it shouldn't have that long of a cooldown. You can spam feed particles to your Xiangling, use Bennett E, swap the Xiangling, use Xiangling as your sub DPS, especially if she has an offensive weapon like a Crescent Pike. She can be dealing damage in the downtime while she gains particles from Bennett and Guoba. The last character in this team is usually Sucrose for the same reasons I mentioned earlier. Viridescent Venerer, Thrilling Tales, can swirl, just really good overall. But you can use something like Zhongli once again, or you can use another DPS. Now, as I said, use Xiangling as my sub DPS in this comp, and she'll be trying to get her Pyronado back. But if you just stack ER on her and you don't want to use her as your sub DPS, you can just put another DPS character in this team. Now we're going to talk about the other way to play Xiangling, where she's just a burst support in a comp. She's not going to shine as much as when she's vaporizing, but she can still be a strong support, so I want to talk about it. In this Xiao team, which is one that I've actually ran a couple times, you'll see like the team is based around Xiao, so there's another Anemo support for him. But then the last 2 characters are Bennett, Xiangling for just a lot of damage with your Pyronado. It can just be a good support overall. In other reaction comps like a Melt Ganyu team, you're going to be running Bennett and Xiangling with Ganyu so that Ganyu can constantly proc Melt. So Xiangling's not going to be the one doing a ton of damage, it's going to be Ganyu. So in this case, as I mentioned in the artifact section, you're going to be wanting to stack energy recharge on Xiangling because once again, Ganyu is the one dealing damage, not really Xiangling. She's mainly there, yes, to deal a bit of damage, but especially to enable your Ganyu's Melt. The last thing I want to address is turbo comps. I didn't really want to go in too much detail about turbo in this video. If you don't know what it is, I'm going to be linking like helpful tweets and stuff because it really takes a dedicated video to go in detail about turbo. But basically it's a comp like this where Fischl as Oz is going to be proccing a bunch of reactions, giving you a ton of particles, letting you spam abilities on everyone. And it makes for a pretty strong comp. But again, it's not something I can go in detailed in this video because this is a Xiangling guide and not a turbo guide. But I thought I should mention it in case you are interested. With all that out of the way, I'm going to show you Xiangling in action. I'm going to do the first clip with Child Xiangling comp. Then after that, I'm going to use this 4-star comp, Xiangling, Xingqiu, Bennett, and Sucrose, and show you the power of her in Abyss 12. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, overall Xiangling is insane, especially C4 onwards, but overall she's just a insanely powerful, like I'm not even exaggerating, she's a top tier pyro carry. I was debating comparing her with Diluc in this video and like giving my controversial opinion of how good Xiangling is, but I don't really want to start that debate. They're good in different situations, they're both really good. But overall, Xiangling is just so strong, especially if you use her correctly. There's a lot to cover. She's a complex character, so if I missed anything or whatever, I'll put it in a pinned comment. Always be sure to check those out because I do value credibility over anything, and if I make a mistake, if I forget something, I always correct it in the pinned comment whenever I notice it. If you're this deep into the video and you haven't subbed yet, what are you doing? No, but for real, thanks so much for the support, guys. Obviously, I appreciate the subs and stuff, and I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm going to end it here. Subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's okay too, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.